Okay. Hello, everybody. I hope you can all hear me and see me. Please let me know if you're able to do that. Just bear with me. I'm just going to share my slides. Okay, hopefully everybody can see that. Apologies for the slight technical hitch. We seem to have just struggled with some issues there, but hopefully we're all back online. Please let me know if you are having any issues in seeing anything or not seeing anything. Do let me know, but otherwise we can. Excellent. Okay, yeah, thank you guys. Everybody saying we can hear me and see me. Fantastic. All right, so let's get this show on the road. I will start again. Okay, so welcome everybody. Thanks for sticking out with us, and apologies for the technical issues again. I hope you've been all enjoying the conference so far. I think there's been some fantastic presentations and some really great talks. They've clearly saved the best for last, so here I am. Thank you very much for sticking with me. So this presentation is going to be about Cloud Center of Excellence and kind of approaching it from a pragmatic point of view. Okay, so let's move on with the slides. Okay, so I just wanted to just make a quick dedication to my father, Mr. Andrew Joseph Simon, who's currently, unfortunately, in hospital battling a heart condition. So, Dad, I hope you get well soon, and I'll see you soon as well. Okay, so quick intro. So I'm Richard Simon. I've really been in the IT industry for probably longer than I care to remember. Unfortunately, the number is there, so I can't avoid that. I've really kind of focused on cloud solutions, architecture, and consultancy, although I'm also sort of generally a cloud native advocate as well. And most recently, I've also focused on things like conference speaking, as you can see, and also have a YouTube channel, which I'll provide details for later on as well. I've worked for a number of different vendors, so the likes of IBM, SUSE, Mirantis, Heptio, Worldwide Technology, and most recently, I co-founded and the CTO for a cloud-native startup company in the UK called Multi-Cloud Global. We offer a number of services to both IT vendors and also enterprises. Okay, so quickly in the agenda, we're going to just go through very quickly, do a quick sort of short summary of the sort of the cloud state of play, and then really go into the Cloud Center of Excellence. What does that mean? Definition of that, the benefits of that, and so on. Look at some of the principles and frameworks that you need around the CCOE as well, and how, as you're kind of going to put that together and form that. How you measure the success in the CCOE, and also some of the actions. As we said, this is a pragmatic sort of presentation. So really kind of some of the best practices that you can put in place as you go forward. The organizers have asked me to provide some closing notices, so I'll be doing that, and then we'll be able to hopefully hit the Q&A, and we're sure we'll have plenty of time to cover all of that as well. Okay, so obviously this is a fairly short presentation. I'm not going to be able to really cover everything in the CCOE, but there are references that I'll be providing in the slides, so you can actually look at some of the content in greater detail as we go through the sections, and also obviously you can go and look at the information yourself later on. Okay, so cloud state of play. Public cloud services have really increased probably exponentially over the last few years, so worth well over $200 billion as of 2019, according to IDC. This actual number is more than the combined revenue of all of the major data center players. So if you remember any of the names in the data center, this number is actually in combination is more than all of their revenue. So that should be able to kind of give you an indicator of what's happening in public cloud. Also, things like the pandemic doesn't seem to have stopped most organizations. They've really continued, if not probably actually accelerated their plans for digital transformation. So those journeys have actually continued over the last 18 months or so. And obviously, one of the things that have happened, and you saw a lot of talks around that in this particular conference around containers and adopting containers, as well as things like orchestration with things like Kubernetes. These have all been really high on the agenda for CIOs and CTOs. And again, this is part of that kind of shift, if you like, in the data center and where things are going forward. Now, I've been developing this chart for a number of years, and it kind of just shows you that sort of journey from the data center on the left towards the cloud and public cloud around the right, where really most organizations, obviously kind of coming from that sort of traditional IT environment, they've kind of experimented, looked at what I would call this sort of the transitional IT technologies. So these have included things like hyperconverged infrastructure, OpenStack, software-defined data center, converged infrastructure, and so on. So this really was kind of probably a knee-jerk reaction to a lot of the traditional technologies that were really preventing IT and applications and software from really moving as fast as they would like to. So I've called this kind of column a sort of a transitional IT. It's not quite really into the cloud space, but it's kind of a stepping stone for some, or has been a stepping stone for some enterprises. So really from private all the way to multi-cloud is where really cloud has happened. Most organizations kind of went as far as or started with infrastructure as a service, so kind of moved their applications kicking and screaming into the cloud and deployed them into essentially equivalent virtual machines from what they had in the data center. This involved a number of different types of technologies. It was kind of slightly messy because not everybody was doing the same thing and not everybody was moving in the same direction within an organization. And as we were kind of getting used to that sort of first stage of cloud migration, things like containers and orchestration happened. And that's where things like container runtimes, orchestration, the ability to actually manage those using some kind of management, service management, and AI ops really all came in. Some organizations actually looked at SaaS, so they actually went software as a service directly from the data center. So rather than migrating, for example, their aging HR application, they kind of went off and used something as a SaaS solution instead. And as we were looking at containers, the applications were still kind of being developed in the traditional monolithic way. So something had to happen along that to change that, to make them more streamlined, to break up the applications. So things like DevOps really came in to change that development culture and really affect that entire software development lifecycle, that SDLC, of how you actually write applications. And along with that, obviously, various implications happen. So things like, how do you automate that process using things like CI/CD pipelines? How do you bake security into the development? So things like DevSecOps came in. And how do you actually automate that entire process using automation tools? And then obviously, I guess the sort of the rightmost sort of columns where really everybody's trying to head to in most cases. Obviously not all applications can suit a serverless is suited for that, but certainly that's where most things can actually migrate to. So with serverless, we have things like infrastructure as code, spot instances, the development of things like microservices, and really sort of entire world engines, what I call world engines, the systems that would actually generate the entire environment for you in the cloud, including things like Kubernetes as a service. So this really kind of shows you the some of the stages. When I present this to customers, a lot of customers kind of tend to identify where they are from this chart along that journey, and it helps us to actually start a conversation with them to actually understand what their journey is like and what their pain points have been. Okay, so part of that journey is obviously adopting a cloud operating model. So this is a great example from HashiCorp, which kind of really shows you some of the areas that change as you go from the data center into the cloud or multi-cloud environment, and how those actually sort of are affected by this migration journey. So I won't go through all the details, but suffice to say things like connectivity and security are greatly affected by that. So we go from a host-based environment into a service-based environment in the cloud. So the host server or the host system is no longer as important as what the service is that it's actually running. In security, we go from things like account-based, where we have a sort of a castle and moat approach to a high trust environment, to a low or zero trust environment, and an environment that's actually identity based. So it's no longer account based, but actually who you are and what kind of service you are and what you're trying to do and what kind of capabilities you can offer to that cloud environment. And again, as we said, the rapid march towards cloud native. So we've said, or we've seen early versions of this sort of happening over the last sort of 10 to 15 years. So things like service-oriented architectures, enterprise service buses, and all the way sort of to cloud native, where you really have smarter platforms, but kind of not so smart services running around those, all sort of interconnected using proxies. And again, the march towards that is not just really affecting the technology, but obviously the people, the process, how you architect things, as well as obviously the infrastructure that you implement everything on. All of these things are being affected by this migration to cloud. So how do we actually dictate that? How do we manage that? How do we govern all of that? We need to have something in place that will be able to manage all of these changes and be able to cope with the changes that are required by the business. So enter Cloud Center of Excellence. This is really the sort of the aspect of your IT team, of your IT division, that will really be able to manage and govern that. So a quick definition. CCOE doesn't have to be a physical team. So if you're a startup or a small organization, it can be a virtual team, but it certainly needs to be a cross-functional team that really kind of delivers on the strategy. And it really needs to be empowered. It needs to have the authority for taking the organization into the cloud. CCOE also delivers sort of all the major decisions and the governance around how you evaluate cloud platforms, how you make your selections, which partners do you work with, how do you go about doing proof of concepts, and then eventually how do you actually look at migrating your actual applications. So CCOE is really a team that's there to set the standards and the authority for the cloud migration program. Okay, so some of the benefits of CCOE, structurally and operational, it obviously is designed to really help you to make changes to that, but also introduce efficiencies into that process, so you can actually be able to take advantage of all the things that cloud can offer you. The selection criteria, as we said, and also setting standards in terms of which cloud, how do you operate, how do you deploy and migrate applications into the cloud. That's all part of really what the CCOE will do. And as we said, governance and authority. If the CCOE cannot govern, and if it doesn't have any authority over other aspects or other parts of or teams in IT, then it's going to really make it difficult, or it's not going to be a successful transition to the cloud. One of the other things that can also introduce is automation and iteration. So the ability to automate a lot of the menial tasks that IT has been actually doing so far, as well as being able to actually consolidate. So whether that's tooling or process or the types of procedures and things that you actually do for particular tasks, a lot of those can actually be consolidated as part of the sort of CCOE and how it's developing the strategy. One of the other things that obviously CCOE offers is innovation and speed. So the ability to actually accelerate the time to market and be able to actually develop applications and deploy applications more quickly. That's really one of the goals of the CCOE. So the whole idea really is to have an accelerated and sustainable way to adopt cloud services. And in terms of who would benefit, well, certainly the leadership would benefit, the IT team would benefit because they're modernizing and upskilling their experience, as well as your customers, be they internal customers or end customers, as well as the entire organization itself. And the chart on the right actually shows you kind of some of the major components of sort of the Cloud Center of Excellence. But actually, this is not necessarily a IT chart. Lo and behold, this is actually something that the Agricultural Skills Council in India has put together. And as you can see, actually the components of that are not too far from how an IT Cloud Center of Excellence needs to operate. So as you can see, the actual sort of implementation or the formation and some of the philosophy around a center of excellence is really pretty much the same, depending, not really difficult to actually see what those major components are, and regardless of the actual industry that you're in. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the sort of frameworks of that. So how do we build a CCOE? Well, you really need to have exec sponsorship. I cannot stress how important this particular point is. In fact, if you do not have exec sponsorship from the CXO level within your organization, then it's really going to be difficult for the CCOE team to be empowered and for them to go off and deliver on things like the principles of learning, leading, scaling, and securing your cloud environment. They need to be responsible and accountable, so that the CCOE team needs to be accountable to itself as well as to the rest of the business. They need to be able to preach and teach what they learn and show some of the best practices that they're putting into place. So it's not a closed shop. It needs to be very open and needs to be communicating with the rest of the organization. Obviously, you need to adopt a cloud operating model, and that will come in time as the team is actually building up and making decisions as to which direction to go. And obviously, you need to, at some point, adopt a cloud-native architecture. So not necessarily maybe for legacy applications, but certainly any new applications that come in. Now, all the major public cloud providers all offer a cloud adoption frameworks. There's lots of literature around that. Again, more than happy to provide you guys with that later on. But that's really the important aspect to look at when it comes to actually putting the components together of what the literature is going to be for the CCOE. So what does the actual CCOE create can be based around some of these cloud adoption frameworks. Okay, so what does the team look like? Well, the CCOE squad is really about people. It can be sort of all these standards, and it can be sort of the decisions and so on, but really you have to start with the people. So it needs to involve, as we said, across the spectrum of skills and individuals. So your solutions architects, project managers, ops teams, SREs and engineers, infrastructure teams, as well as even HR. So make sure that all of those components of your organization and of the IT team are actually all involved. So that includes security, networking, storage teams, etc. They all need database teams, etc. They all really need to be involved and all need to be included in the Cloud Center of Excellence. Now, not all of them have to be full-time members if you're a large organization, but they certainly need to have a dotted line into the CCOE and need to attend all the sort of the major decisional points that the CCOE reaches in the roadmap. Obviously, people's needs are at the heart of the success of and successful formation of the team. So we need to kind of look at starting that team in the short term, turning that team into sort of cloud advocates, and then sort of reaching an innovative sort of stage in the long term. So personalities matter. We need to look at, again, I think the source was AWS. So AWS kind of looked at the personalities of the team. So you need people who are kind of happy to experiment and test out new things, more results-oriented, fail-fast sort of approach to how you evaluate things, bold in terms of taking steps of evaluating technologies and making decisions. Certainly be influencers and also have exceptional customer focus as well. Those are all kind of some of the traits of personality that you require in that team. And obviously, they need to embrace change because this is all about change. So they need to be really change agents and be able to actually deliver that change to the organization and drive that through. And as we said, diversity and cross-functionality is really important so that everybody within the IT team and beyond actually has a say in terms of the decisions that the CCOE will make going forward. And the other thing is not to kind of be micro when it comes to the requirements or the focus that you have in the CCOE. You need to really kind of look at the bigger picture, think 1 year, 3 years, 5 years kind of goals that you want to achieve. And that's something certainly that I offered as a advice to customers to have a kind of a 1 year action plan, sort of a 3 year sort of strategy, and a sort of a 5 year really goal that you want to achieve. Okay, so how do we measure the success of the CCOE? What are some of the things that we can actually do? Okay, so the CCOE goals and the outcomes. Really, as we said, stakeholder support has to be there. If it's not there, then this is not going to work. The CEO, CIO, CTOs, etc., and even the enterprise architects all need to be on board to make the CCOE work. You also need the stakeholder support, the business stakeholder support. The app owners need to be also involved, actively involved, and have representation in the CCOE, even if it's just a dotted line, as we said, depending on the size of your organization. Contrasting the current work and the current pain points that you have with things like agility, stability, and cost or cost reduction is really a good way to be able to look at the outcomes and achievements of the CCOE. And so that's a really important test to actually do to contrast sort of some of the issues that you had in the data center versus how things are now working, or how can they be working if you were in the cloud. Automation, as we said, of common sort of tasks and things like that. Again, that's a really great way to measure the success of the CCOE. And actually having a consistent roadmap. Everybody's on board. Everybody's going in the same direction. Everybody understands what the goals are. And these have been communicated very clearly by the CCOE to the rest of the business. And obviously, the idea is to really democratize IT. So make it pervasive, make it common, and have one voice to actually be able to deliver that democratization to the rest of your organization. And again, one of the things that you can probably look at is kind of how you reduce the severities and how do you mitigate risk? Has that actually been successful? Has the CCOE been able to actually achieve that? The other thing, obviously, to go beyond is to look at the skill sets and how these have actually changed. Look at the, broadening your technical scope in terms of what you're delivering in the cloud versus what you were able to do in the data center. And also really kind of moving the goalpost when it comes to IT. IT no longer a cost center, but really an innovator, an enabler to the business solutions that you have. So kind of really having a sort of a higher level engagement with the business. And obviously, as we said, the innovation has to be there, and the CCOE needs to prove or show that innovation has been accelerated if we go cloud. If we do everything in cloud, or all new projects are based in cloud, then it needs to be that needs to be demonstrated. And obviously, that in itself brings an accelerated time to market. And the last thing, I guess, is, or maybe even the first thing to ask yourself is, are you now a cloud-first company? So if that is the case, new projects are automatically going into the cloud. Their architecture is based around cloud, how they're developed. If they're in-house applications, is cloud. How they're automated in terms of their provisioning is cloud first. Then all of that means success as far as the CCOE is concerned. And that's, again, a great measure to have for your CCOE outcomes. Okay, so how can we look at some of the successes in terms of the actions that we can take and the best practices that we can have? Okay, so really the way to modernize IT is to actually look at agile methodologies and value streams. So you've got to really measure everything that the CCOE is doing and how the results of that are going through by looking at the way that you've actually modernized your IT. Building, as we said, iterative processes. So whether you're provisioning or baking in the security, having compliance and regulations, and also doing things like service management policies. Again, this is all part of the sort of things that you need to really put in place and have as part of your best practices in the CCOE. Architecture will change because you're now really scaling towards high availability and being able to provide a much more scale-out capability for your designs. So this is, again, very important to have in place as a best practice as you're developing your designs, as you're developing your principles in the Cloud Center of Excellence. In terms of evaluation, well, there's obviously a plethora of cloud-native tools and platforms. So again, you need to sort of consolidate and approve those cloud native tools. And as we said earlier, to be able to really have everybody running on the same tooling, the same platform, is part of the best practices the CCOE needs to implement. And as we said, iteration is important. So, using automation solutions, standardizing around certain platforms and certain technologies is, again, extremely important. Advocating a full development lifecycle, the SDLC, the software development lifecycle, is really important because we need to really be able to develop new applications in the new way. There's no point in migrating 1,000 applications from your data center only to find that the next iteration of those applications is written in the old way again. So DevOps, DevSecOps, SDLC, advocating that new culture of DevOps all needs to be part of the drive that the CCOE provides. And again, you need to really sort of look at your first 12 months. If you've achieved some sort of velocity in that, you've won the sort of the stakeholders, you've created the landing zone, and demonstrated even just one application that has been successfully migrated with its data into the cloud, then that's a really good starting point. These things are not going to happen overnight. This is a really slow process. So if you're not there, or you've already started in cloud, but you haven't really looked at forming a cloud center of excellence, and it's kind of working a little bit, but you've got lots of loose ends that you need to really tie up together, then this is really the way to do that. The best practices for CCOE say that you have to have achieved something in the first 12 months, actually something that can be demonstrated as a successful migration of the application or the service, as well as the data into the cloud. So whether it's winning around the application migration itself, or having the framework in place, all of that really needs to be part of the best practices that you put in place in your CCOE. And obviously, you've got to have a cloud roadmap. Break this down into phases. At your discretion, depending on your organization, how quickly you move, your sort of the political atmosphere within the organization, and the drive and the need to actually go to cloud. But you need to have a roadmap in place, something, as I said earlier, to aim for. That sort of 1 year action plan, sort of 3 year sort of goals, and 5-year vision, if you like, needs to be in place and needs to be part of the CCOE's cloud roadmap. Okay, so that concludes the slides that I had. I hope that's been useful to you. As I said, there's a ton more of information. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A tab, and I'll try and get to them towards the end, and we'll get to that as soon as we can. But just in the interest of time, there was a couple of housekeeping messages or notices from the organizers, so I just wanted to go through those very quickly. So this is a couple of messages. Since this is the closing keynote, I wanted just to go through that and mention those for you. Okay, so first of all, really massive thank you to all the attendees for joining the DevOps Pro Europe conference. Please connect with us on LinkedIn. Go and watch some of the sessions that you've missed out on, maybe because they were running in parallel with something else. I made a note earlier of some of the fantastic titles for these slides, so I'll just go through those with you because they were absolutely wonderful. Things like why Apollo 11 landing nearly failed. I'd like to know that, so I'll definitely go back and have a look at that. How to engineer kindness. Great, that sounds wonderful. Watch your wallet. I always do that. Disorganization or disorganizing your organization. Great one. Istio to the rescue. I really love that one. I think that's going to be a fantastic one. I'll definitely go back and have a look at that. And finally, the need for speed. So those are just some of the titles that I picked up on. I'm sure there's lots of other ones there. So by all means, do that. Please rate all of the talks and share your thoughts on the conference on social media as well. And as I said, please feel free to connect with us and drop us emails as well. Also, the organizers wanted to thank all of the speakers. So thank you for all the hard work that's been put in and all the excellent content that's been presented. As we said, please connect with us and explore all of these solutions that are provided by all of the speakers. Continue to ask more questions and check out the websites of all the speakers, all the presenters, and all the social media platforms as well. And finally, last but not least, the organizers also wish to thank all of the partners that have supported the DevOps Pro Europe 2021 conference. Please connect with them, check out all of the great solutions that they have on offer, and they've been very generous in terms of their sponsorship. So Sonotype, the likes of Esper Bank, Flow Health, and Landit as well have all been fantastic sponsors as well. Okay, I've also provided some links for you here in terms of the multi-cloud global, what we do as an organization, and some of the services that we offer, things like CCOE as a service. So we offer small organizations a service that will help them to actually set up their CCOE. So that's available to you as a service. We're also obviously on LinkedIn, so please connect with us on there. And we share regularly our comments and thoughts on cloud native and cloud in general. I also have personally a YouTube channel called The Cloud Therapists. Really, it's all about cloud native talks. So I have a great lineup. I've got lots of content on there at the moment, but also more content coming up from various organizations as well. So again, do check out the videos, subscribe to that if you can, and drop us a like or a comment or whatever if you enjoy the some of the material that's actually on there. I've also written for the likes of Cloud Expo Europe. So again, some articles there you can check out. All the links are there for you. Okay, so now we go on to the Q&A. Please don't feel shy. Do ask the questions if you have any questions. I will check out the Q&A section, see if there's any questions there. Okay. So there's a question, I think, about all the talks. I believe these will be made available. So if they're not actually available right now, I think they will be made available for playback later on after the conference. Again, actually put a question in the Slack channels, and hopefully somebody should be able to provide you some details from the organizers on that. Has anybody else got any questions? Has that been a useful presentation? Do you have any questions, any concerns? Did it actually kind of make any sense? The slides will be available to you, by the way, so you can feel free to check those out. As we said, if you can't think of anything right now, you can drop your questions later on to me as well. So more than happy to check those out for you later on and be able to give you some details. Yeah, so all references are actually there as well. Most of the material that I've used is really based around some of the public cloud providers and kind of their take on Cloud Center of Excellence, as well as some articles that and blogs that we've written in Multi-Cloud Global as well. Okay, any questions at all? I will give you a couple of minutes if anybody has any questions for me. Actually, I wanted to ask a question. If do you all, does everybody have a CCOE, or kind of a virtual CCOE, or somebody who's designated as a CCOE? So feel free to put that in the chat if you want to answer that. Okay, I don't see any inputs there. I'll give it a couple of minutes. Okay, nothing in the Q&A any further. I'll give you a couple of more minutes on that. I think we're still okay for time. Yep, I think we've got a couple of more minutes. Okay, so somebody said, no, we don't. Yeah, so certainly probably something to to think about. I appreciate some organizations have kind of moved really forward very quickly, tried to sort of get there into the cloud and be able to establish sort of an environment in cloud. But I think what the CCOE is offering, certainly from my experience and from the customers that I've engaged with in the past and recently, it really does help to prevent some of those issues that you might encounter later on. So it's really important to be able to have that sort of capability in place as soon as possible, and retrofit it if you have to or if you can, because it still makes sense to actually have that in place. So it's really good to be able to do that, because I think if you don't have that in place, then you don't really have a central area, central point of contact where all of the sort of the policies and strategies for how you go to cloud, how you do cloud, are actually implemented. Yeah, so another comment there about the larger the organization is, the harder it is to move to cloud. Absolutely. So you've got all of that baggage behind you to deal with. Some of the customers I've spoken to recently, they've had a backlog of 800 plus applications to migrate. So these are investment banks, for example, and they've had a factory application migration factory team, but they've not been able to really move forward. And that's simply because they're not empowered. They don't have a centralized sort of CCOE. There's no endorsement from the CIO or the CTO of the organization. And other teams are actually going off and doing other things. So one conversation I had was around automating some of the migration paths, and the automation team, or the factory team, said actually that somebody else was already using automation in another part of the business. And we actually found that Terraform was actually in place and being used to stand up a modeling, financial modeling environment at another part of the business to deliver whatever modeling they needed. So Terraform was actually in use somewhere else, but that wasn't something that was shared by that team with everybody else and all the other IT teams. So yeah, definitely sort of that package is difficult to migrate, and hence why really large organizations definitely need a CCOE, and it needs to be empowered and it needs to have the authority to make the decisions. Okay, so got a couple of questions coming in. So just bear with me. Okay, so should the CCOE team be focused also on corporate responsibility to choose cloud strategy and DevOps on sustainable platforms? Definitely, yes. I mean, it's difficult enough, I would say, probably to stand up that environment. But if you can actually do that and have that integrated as part of the sort of the CCOE philosophy and the strategy, then yes, you should definitely try and do that. And actually, that is something that I am seeing more of. So there are more people talking about sustainability in terms of their platforms and their sort of decisions. So definitely, yes, absolutely, good question. Okay, another question. How do you prove to management where organizations should be heading in terms of cloud native solutions, SaaS, and so on? Well, that's largely probably dependent on the types of applications that you have, whether they're in-house developed or they're off the shelf. As I said earlier, some applications can move to SaaS, for example. So if you had a sort of a very antiquated HR system or CRM system, it'll probably end up in Salesforce or Workday or something like that. And it's just not really, it's probably too much of a headache and difficulty to actually try and migrate that and shove that into a container kicking and screaming. So probably the best is to to have that have the data for that actually migrated into the cloud. But in terms of where it should be heading, in terms of the cloud native solutions, as I said, that's kind of really dependent on the organization. But there are some very general, universal themes that all organizations need to be looking at and moving towards. So things like the CCOE, things like cloud native, things like a cloud operating model, and the democratization of IT, and having those things in mind. All of that is really part of that sort of strategy and reasons that you need to as you know to have as you're going into the cloud. And then actually the decision to go into cloud is very much dependent on, like I said, the organization and whether the organization can actually see the benefit of cloud, and whether cloud can actually bring about a change. It can bring about competitiveness, accelerated time to value, time to market, and so on. Okay. Any other questions? Interesting one I had was just wanted to ask you, going back to that chart. This is not it's an impromptu poll. Let me just go back to. Just wanted to ask where everybody was on that journey, whether they can identify with that journey. Is anybody still in the data center, perhaps, or kind of has looked at some of those transitional IT sort of technologies and implemented maybe some of those, are purely looking at cloud or are in the cloud already and perhaps even well advanced in terms of the implementations that you have? Feel free to provide some feedback on that. And I'll be in the Slack channel later on as well, so feel free to ask any more questions and drop any more information into that. Excellent. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so some people saying sort of that sort of container and DevOps space. Hybrid. Okay, excellent. That's always an interesting one to know how that actually works and how that's actually achieved. Although the public cloud providers have kind of all offered their own on-prem platforms. Again, a lot of the kind of that stretched environment can be sort of fraught with difficulties sometimes, especially if you don't have a fat enough pipe to have the communications. You have issues with latency, and then obviously the UX or the user experience is affected by that. So that's always an interesting area in terms of a hybrid cloud. Hybrid, somebody else mentioned. Excellent, thank you. I'm having to switch between these tabs. It's not always so easy to do that, but yeah, getting there. Excellent. Okay. Right. Well, if there's no more questions, like I said, I'll be around in the. I don't think there's any more questions there that I can see, unless the moderator tells me there is. Yeah, I'll certainly be in the Slack channel, so by all means, catch up with me there. Please feel free to connect with me on the LinkedIn. So happy to connect with you guys. If you have any requirements for particular types of services, or whatever, we offer a number of services. So by all means, to do that. But yeah, thank you for that again. So on-prem, Google and Azure, thank you for that response. Yeah, so absolutely do that. Feel free to connect with me, as we said. Please do check out the links that I provided, the YouTube channel and so on, share, connect, etc. It would be really great to hear from you and hear more from you in terms of your opinions. Like I said, I'll be in the Slack channel a bit later. So it only remains to me to thank you very much for not just attending this closing note. I know it's taken up a lot of your time, the sort of the 2 days. So really appreciate you guys spending the time with us. But also thank you for attending the entire conference as well. As we said, everything will be available to you for playback. So do go and check it out. Any of those sort of other presentations and talks that you've missed out on. I'm certainly going to do that because I missed out on quite a lot. I was quite busy with other things. So I'm looking forward to catching up as well. And yeah, I wish you all a great day, a great afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you happen to be. Thank you very much. I will just stop sharing there for my slides. Yeah, and take care. Thank you.